Hello everyone, I'm Fraser Simons and I'm talking about Effect by Charlene Elsby today. This is a CanLit book or Canadian literature book, and I found it on the Scotia Giller Prize. They have sort of like a watch list for books that are coming out in Canada that they think are interesting, and it probably works towards a long list and eventually, at least, I'm not sure, but it's a good resource to find Canadian literature for people who are looking for things that are coming out this year that are interesting and might not be on your radar. So I will link that below for you if you want to check it out. There's lots and lots of good stuff. I've already found 3 or 4 titles, some of which are on NetGalley still. So for people who have access to NetGalley and can get ARC's advanced reader copies, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can still do and help out some Canadian authors. So for this book, Charlene Elsby's Effect, it is the second book by the author, I believe. I did not read the first one because it's a horror book. I have heard it's very good though. I expect it would be after reading this. This is actually a 5-star for me, which is pretty rare. In 260-ish books I think I'm at for the year, I've given out like 3 5-stars only, and this is one of them, so it's been a good week. This is a strange book, I would say. It is about a philosophy grad student who meets a boy named Logan, and it sort of traces their trajectory from first meeting and like hooking up to what happens to them. Do they get together? Do they not get together? All through this narrator's gaze, who is unnamed. We note that she's a woman though. And because she's a philosophy student, that really informs how, because she's a philosophy student, that really informs what her point of view is like. Everything is sort of characterized by an almost academic jargon. It's definitely designed to be more accessible to a reader, and it makes sense. All the things that follow, how she perceives the world, what she defines as objects, what she defines as like social constructs, the things that she worries about fitting in, not fitting in, what Logan is thinking of, what she's thinking of. All of these things kind of collide in her mind so that it's almost like a Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind kind of vibe, where the things that she thinks about can intrude onto the narration of any given vignette, which is more or less how chapters are formed in this book. Basically, what ends up happening is some chapters are completely subjective and feel like they're taking place entirely inside of her mind. And sometimes this is self-evident, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to reread what is happening in order to figure it out. So it's a very engaging text, I'll say that. But it's very fun because even though she is not entirely outspoken, I'd say there's very little dialogue in this book. Everything in the world really helps to characterize who she is. Her perceptions of reality are very, it's almost like a separate character, basically. It's evolving and shifting. It's a very active book, and it's wholly unique as far as I'm aware. I haven't read anything like it that is quite so surreal, engaging, and primarily from a philosophical bent. So she establishes all of these things about her core sort of architecture, her the makeup of her point of view, and then applies them to different situations, as I said, either in her mind or what is happening externally. And so what ends up happening is there's an unreliable narrator happening, but it doesn't really matter. I didn't care whether something was happening in real time, in reality, or if it was something in her mind, because to her, both things are equal. If no matter if she is imagining something or if something is happening that she's projecting from an internal monologue or structure or struggle, whether internal or external, it's equally valuable to her in working through. And it always illuminates something interesting about her personality. And it's just so interesting to have a text where even very mundane, innocuous details matter so much. There's a scene where she and Logan are going to get breakfast the day after that they hook up, and basically they're just in an elevator, and it's a little bit awkward because there's a man named Nick in the elevator with them who is her ex, except that as things start progressing and it's getting more surreal, we're not sure if Nick is actually there, and if he is, the internal associations that the narrator has with Nick are playing out as if they are real, and Logan is actually somewhat interacting. He's there, he's not really paying attention to what's happening, but yet the narrator and Nick are having this conversation that's like the most brutal honesty that a couple would have, yet Logan is right there. Like, it's a really weird, brutally honest conversation as if nobody else is in the room. And all of these surrealist details start coming into play where the barista at the coffee house or the breakfast place that they go to seems like they're in an assembly line of doing things very quickly, pouring out drinks, and time just has like an accelerated or decelerated aspect to it as this scene with Nick is playing out, just because that's how she feels at that moment, when in reality it could just be interpreted that A, either Nick wasn't there at all, or B, Nick got off at like another floor, Logan never noticed anything, and all of this was just internal and they just went and got a coffee and ate or whatever, right? So there's a rereadability quality to this text that I think would be very fun, and it's not very large. It didn't take me long. I think it took me 2 sittings, maybe 3-4 hours, something like that. It reads very quickly, and I think you would take away details of it every time that you did reread it, just because it's so dense and rich with all these different details. And even just a few days later now, I wouldn't know how to articulate the philosophical aspects of the book that I found most engaging and interesting to other people. It's something that I think a reader just has to experience. If you don't have the intellectual jargon of philosophy down, I think it would be very hard for you to specify exactly in which ways the narrator perceives the world, what she subscribes to and what she doesn't, even though she does tell you what those things are. It's just something that you have to interpret from the fiction regardless. Multi-layered in its complexity and texture of the actual prose are just very unique. The actual formatting of the book, the style of the prose, switches between normal prose and a meter that's very poetic. Sometimes there's onomatopoeia, sometimes there is alliteration, and it's all just for the quality and the sound of the paragraph that you're reading. So it's very interesting that she has this like analytical, intellectual brain, and yet she swings back and forth between this very poetic mastery of her interpretation of the world, where her mind is interpreting all these different things and contextualizing them as poetry, and then also analyzing things as very specific objects and what value that has in her life. even when she's just looking at Logan before their date begins from afar, she's very analytical. And so when that analysis comes into play with the prose, there's this like cognitive dissonance that's happening. And like I said, there's just so much about the text that is engaging and unique that I knew very early on that I thought it would be a 5-star read, just because consuming something that I've never read before in a way that hasn't been written as far as I'm aware, or as far as I've consumed, is a rarity for me. And I really like experimental fiction. If you don't like experimental fiction, I don't think this will be for you. But if you do, I think there's a lot to be gained from this. And this is the Porcupine Quill, Erin, Ontario. So it could be one of these where these some Canadian publishers just won't even distribute these books outside of it. So I hope that if that's the case, then it will at least eventually make its way to America in some form or another. But if you can get your hands on the book, I highly recommend it. It's like nothing that I've read before. Is there other books that you've read that are kind of like this? Experimental, philosophical, poetic? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to check out more fiction that is kind of like this. It seems like it will be my new, maybe little hobby, finding stuff like this and trying to consume it. I'm Fraser Simons, and I hope that I will see you next video.